Okay, folks, welcome to my latest episode of Reviewing the Future. What is the future? Well, it's one of the latest books by Stefan Molyneux. Stefan Molyneux is an Irish born Canadian anarcho capitalist podcaster who promotes philosophy, non aggressive parenting, stateless societies, and hard boiled scientific empiricism. That's my summary because if you go and look him up on Wikipedia, you get a hit piece. Now, if you want to look up his websites and such, here is a quick list of them. If you want to get a copy of his book, The Future, then you need to go sign up on freedomain.locals.com. And after you pay the $5 a month subscription, you can get all of his books for free. And we are going to be looking at this book in particular. It is called The Future, and it is to his philosophy what Atlas Shrugged is to Ayn Rand's philosophy. Ayn Rand, of course, is famous for her philosophy of objectivism, in which she basically communicated the philosophy of objectivism through the narrative structure of her book Atlas Shrugged and the philosophical encounters that her characters underwent there. So Stefan Molyneux is attempting to do the same thing with his book The Future. Let's see if it measures up. Now, I'm going to give you a quick recap up through Chapter 2. Starting with the prologue, 95% of humanity has perished in a 4 centuries-long war. Humanity is saved when a group of doomed unnamed men release their angels, which are humanoid drones with weapons, to destroy all of mankind's weapons of mass destruction. Now, I wanted to take a little bit of time to muse a bit on the prologue, because as I was giving this recap, as I was writing this up, I realized that there is some symbolism connecting it with Genesis 3. If you look at Genesis 3 in the Bible, after mankind corrupts itself, it is ejected from paradise and prevented from ever returning by a God-created angel with a flaming sword. So basically, God appoints one of the cherubim with a flaming sword to basically keep humanity from ever getting back to a paradise-like state. And it's kind of interesting to see a parallel here, because not only in this mythic prologue do you have man creating angels, in this case, which will deliver him to paradise, which is kind of a reversal of this motif. You know, God creates the angel to keep man out of paradise. Man creates the angels to deliver him into paradise, to make it possible for a new utopian world to come about. And one of the things that I realized about this is, like, the angel with the flaming sword. What dooms the men in the prologue is that there are these satellite lasers, and that satellite laser is kind of analogous to this flaming sword that God has created for the angel to keep out humanity with. So it is this flaming sword in the sky, this satellite laser, that is keeping man from being able to accomplish a new society, to rebuild society from the ground up. And so man creates a counter angel, in a sense, to deliver him to paradise. And metaphorically, there is the concept of God that is keeping man from paradise, because the lasers were apparently developed by some sort of elites or authorities, or militaries who would possess authority over mankind, and thus keep them down and keep them from rebelling against their authority. And it's this very concept of authority itself, which Molyneux in his philosophy rejects, the idea that anyone should have any sort of authority over another person, unless it is a voluntary subscribe to authority. And that is something that is antithetical to the concept of God itself, as God is a concept of supreme authority. So it's just interesting to see that kind of parallel going here. And but I do find there is a bit of a contradiction, in the sense that the angels themselves in this book constitute a kind of weapons of mass destruction, because they are basically targeting the satellites as opposed to targeting people. But they are still, going around and destroying things, and they've been programmed by these benevolent elites who, in their elite wisdom, have decided that these satellite lasers are something that mankind cannot suffer under any longer. And so, in a way, you have these men who have sealed themselves off from society in order that they can create these angels and therefore save mankind, they are basically imposing their will right back in the sense of saying, no, you can't have these kinds of weapons anymore. We have to bring the level of weaponry down to something that is more manageable. And that's also one of the reasons why, when I started looking at the prologue, I was thinking maybe this should be discarded, because this whole idea of having to get rid of weapons of mass destruction before you can have this kind of peaceful society, it just seems so pie in the sky that it kind of throws a monkey wrench into any kind of immediate acceptance of the premise. I'll get to that in a little bit later. But let's get back to the recap. So we have this basic recap of the prologue, and then getting into chapters 1 and 2, we find that in a near-utopian future civilization, the former president of the United States, Lewis Staten, is wakened from a centuries-long cryogenic sleep. He mistakenly believes that his resuscitation can be attributed to the validity of his theories on the pursuit of power. So this is a very, very powerful man who's being awakened from cryogenic sleep, and he's being awakened into a society which he assumes is going to be something patterned after his own views. But in fact, the near utopia into which he is awakened is built upon the rejection of his theories, and this future intends to judge him. So, not waking up to the kind of future that he thought he would be. Now, my assessment, as I just basically said, was that this prologue ought to be gotten rid of altogether, because the whole mythic sense of it makes it feel like, okay, well, without "and then a miracle occurred," you can never get to this peaceful society, and therefore, what is actually going on here? Are you just giving us some kind of pie in the sky fantasy, or is this something that you actually think can happen? And then this other section about the former president of the United States being woken up, there's not any kind of narrative that has been established so far that we can hook these events onto. We're being told too much too soon, and so this portion ought to have been moved into later in the book, after the actual narrative flow of the book has started, and that's when we ought to get into this scene and have the president be awakened, so that we can have him merge into the flow of the general book. And that flow begins right now with chapter 3. So in chapter 3, this is where the real story of the future, the novel, begins. And we start with the protagonist named Alice. Alice is the daughter of David, a man we meet in chapter 2, who's overseeing the resuscitation of Lewis Staten from cryosleep. Although, there's no mention of this fact for the next 10 freaking chapters. So, that's one of the reasons why I say that portion with Lewis Staten needs to be moved to later in the book. It's totally inconsequential to the next few chapters of the book, or the next 10 chapters of the book. So why are we encountering that so early? And then she's also the daughter of Gretchen, who is a woman we meet in this chapter, in chapter 3, who creates and disseminates presentations on peaceful parenting to any still backward human societies. Oh, by the way, the David here, it took me a little bit to connect the dots and realize it was the same David that was spoken about in chapter 2 as is in chapter 3. I mean, we don't have a lot of, identifying information about these people, so I'll get to that on the next slide. But right now I need to give you a refresher on peaceful parenting. Peaceful parenting is parenting without the use of any retributive punishments whatsoever. No yelling, no spanking, no timeouts, groundings, no withholding food, etc. Go to your room without supper, that kind of stuff. As much as possible, according to their age and intellectual capacity, children are treated as moral agents on the same level as adults. In other words, you wouldn't do to your child what you wouldn't do to just anybody in society. You don't go around hitting people. You don't go around yelling at people. You don't go around trying to forcibly detain them or deprive them of food. You don't do this to anybody outside your family. You shouldn't do it to anybody inside your family. Instead, children learn to live in obedience, harmony, and happiness with their parents through making and keeping agreements to live by house rules that they themselves participate in creating through negotiation. And it is important to understand that the near-utopian future of our setting for this novel is built on this concept of peaceful parenting. The idea being that if you get rid of the abusive styles of parenting that people have come to accept as normal and moral, and instead you raise a child with just full love and permission and ability to express itself, and with interaction and negotiation in setting up the rules for your household and things like that, then all of those things together will cause the child to blossom into the kind of human being that doesn't need to take power for itself in order to fight against the deprivation of power that it experienced throughout childhood when adults were ruling over them, basically. You don't rule over your child. Instead, you welcome your child into the household as a moral agent on its own. And so that is the whole basic idea behind this near utopian future, is that if you get the parenting right, you can get society right. Now, one of the problems that I find in chapter 3 that's really annoying, and it takes me back to, if you've seen my reviews of the Rippaverse comic book ISOM #1, there's a problem here with naming characters. Now, despite humanity's having been reduced to 5% of its former size, that's still enough people to justify giving the characters surnames. We don't just follow people's identities by their first names, generally speaking, unless you're like in a fantasy novel, where, everybody's like Galador or, Eowyn, and all these names that are like so outside the realm of normalcy that you can't help but remember it. But in the case of characters where you're dealing with kind of a standard, English-speaking civilization, you kind of need to have surnames, because we need to be able to know who it is we're talking about, and the more identifying information you give us about those people, the better. I mean, you do it with Lewis Staten. I don't understand why you don't do it with David or Alice or any of the other characters that we encounter later in the book. This lack of surnames, now, it might be a way of the authors putting the children on an equal moral footing with the adults in the book, the way that peaceful parenting arguably does. In fact, there is a diminishment, in a sense, of the importance of family ties within peaceful parenting, in that you're not assumed to have a connection or any kind of obligations, except, the parents are obligated to the children, but as far as the children being obligated to the parents, there's no such concept in peaceful parenting, because all relationships are considered voluntary. The parents basically voluntarily opted into their relationship with the child and their duties to the child when they decided to conceive the child. But as far as the child goes, the child has no obligation back to the parents, because it didn't ask to be created. It didn't ask to be in that particular family. And therefore, if that family is not up to snuff, it can leave. And so the idea of, having duties to one's parents, especially like the biblical commandment to honor one's father and one's mother, that doesn't really exist in peaceful parenting. You honor these people if they are worthy of honor. So you've got a different way of thinking that maybe that is the reason why we don't see surnames for our main characters in the future, is because it is a downplay of family ties. It also might be concealing the lineages of certain characters. Who knows? Maybe this Lewis Staten turns out to be the ancestors of some of these characters. We don't know. Or maybe there's some other character that'll be introduced later in the book that will be a descendant of the character, and there's just no way to know at this point. But as a general rule, you shouldn't make your reader's life harder. And leaving out surnames makes the reader's life harder, because you're having to, if you say David in one case and David in another case, how do I know that's the same David? I mean, if that's the only David I've been introduced to, well, yeah, okay, there you go. But then you've got to, of course, name all of your characters different things. And with these totally generic names like Alice, David, Gretchen, I mean, that's not so far-fetched that, you really assign any kind of significance to that. It's not like you're dealing with Elrond or Frodo or, even Samwise and things like that. Got him. I know, read another book. I am reading another book. I'm reviewing this one. And here's one of the worst offenses I've seen, and it just makes me want to face palm until my head is bloody. We first encounter Alice's mother Gretchen in chapter 3, but unforgivably she's called Alice's mother until we learn her name in goddamn chapter 11. Chapter fucking 11. What the fuck? I do not I can't even. I can't fucking even. Because how do you not? I mean, you named the father, you don't name the mother until like 8 chapters after she's introduced. I, I just don't even know what to say about that. Don't make this mistake when you're writing a book. Don't make the mistake of leaving off names as if this is something unimportant. In fact, there are a lot of unnamed characters in this book, or at least characters who go a long way before they get named. I'm just jumping ahead to some things that I know from my first reading of the book I haven't read the book actually in its entirety before. I read a few chapters of it before. I think I read almost up through the end of issue or chapter number 12, and now I'm coming back and I'm doing these reviews. So I do know a little bit about where the book is going from here, but I want to say it's freaking confusing to constantly be referred to characters that don't have names. Ugh. Okay, so let me just get past that. All right, so chapters 3 and 4 also, besides having introduced us to Alice and her family, they also introduce us to the technical world of the future, the technology of the future. And I wanted to give a couple of points on that. This near utopian future is really driven by advanced technology. Almost all menial labor is handled via automation. People travel via jetpacks, sky trampolines, and sky taxis. So there's some really wild stuff in there. Medicine is advanced to the disease-curing nanobot stage, although accidental injuries and deaths do still happen. And it is not impossible that people die. It's just that you can actually even upload your body into clone bodies if you want. That's something I went over in my couple of episodes back. Some people lose themselves entirely living in virtual reality their whole lives. There are people who just are completely lost in a fantasy world. Now, there are 5 basic kinds of societies in this future, even though they're all built around the whole concept philosophically of peaceful parenting. The levels of technology that they have in society, they have 5 different kinds. The one that uses technology to the utmost is the big bot kind of society. This is where the nanotech is completely unconstrained. I mean, it's almost like you're living in a world that Arthur C. Clarke described, where he said, technology sufficiently advanced would look like magic. And that's what this kind of society is. I mean, you could be, you could see people like doing shape shifting, and their environments would be changing as if they were the street, the Diagon Alley in Harry Potter's universe would be completely appropriate in a big bot society. A level down from that is the nanobot society, where it looks more like superpowers because these nanobots are invisible, but they do all the sorts of things that you would expect from, say, telekinesis and flying, and you would be looking at it be nanobots doing something like if you gestured to a coffee pot and it floated over to your hand. I mean, obviously, the nanobots are carrying it over. You don't see them, but they're there, and they're making it seem like these things are just floating of their own accord. So it almost makes you look like you have the superpower of telekinesis or something. Step down from that is human bot, where you have no nanotech. You just have robots, but these robots can be up to and including human form. Although, just to make it easier on people, they're not so human as to be indistinguishable from actual humans. You get more of that uncanny valley sensation to them, and they're also marked specifically by a red dot on their left earlobes. Normal bots would be one where there's still no nanotech, and you have robots, but the robots can't resemble humans. And lastly, we've got botless, where you don't have any kinds of robots or artificial intelligence allowed at all, but complex machines are okay. There's no problem with using a combine harvester or using irrigation methods or sprinklers or things that would be normal complex machines, even computers and things like that. You don't Spotless societies have a tendency to be closer to nature than the rest of them, but excuse me, but they're not shy about using machines as they need to. Now, in chapters 5, 6, and 7, we get into the real narrative meat of the book. We have Alice and her friend Emily taking a hiking trip, during which they are apprehended by two boys who are being raised in a wilderness inhabiting society wholly disconnected from the near-utopian civilization and its peaceful parenting. So these are two boys from basically a survivalist type society. Now, the emergency hoverbot accompanying them is destroyed by the boys, and this destruction of private property alone is enough to shock the girls. These girls are coming from a society where crime is just about non-existent. And so when the boys destroy their hoverbot, they're just like, what is even happening here? This does not compute. After accusing the girls of trespassing, the boys require that the girls stay and tend the boys' cook fire until they are done eating. So the boys were interrupted during a meal, and so they're forcing the girls to stay with them and tend to the boys' cook fire. Both boys verbally abuse the girls, and one of the boys even slaps Emily and punches Alice in the stomach. The other boy raises no objection. So you've got both verbal and physical abuse going on here. One boy spouts the propaganda of his society, and note the difference in thought from peaceful parenting. We are the originals. We don't put children on top. We were raised, not praised. We are not princesses like you. We don't expect the world to spin around us. We learn from our elders, the old way, I guess you could say. We are fully human. So they have obviously a very negative view of the society of the future, which puts the needs of children first and the development of children first. It is about the children. Once, as Alice's father David says, once we realized that everything is about you, then we started to get things right. That's not an exact quote. Emily describes the boy's defining characteristic. You don't seem to care how we feel. The boys later hear a tolling in the distance and abandon the girls at the cook fire. After that, a sky taxi summoned by the emergency bot upon its destruction comes for the girls. So the girls leave relatively unharmed, but very much traumatized by their experience. You don't seem to care how we feel. This was the key insight that Emily had during the encounter. The key difference between the girls and the boys is that the girls have empathy and the boys don't. Aside from technological advances, the near-utopian future described in the book is largely the result of humanity's greatly increased empathy due to the widespread application of peaceful parenting. So it's very important to realize that the boys lack what it is that makes this future society possible. And whether or not they can still acquire it is highly questionable. That's one of the things that's going to be discussed in the later chapters. So you've got the girls who have empathy and they care about one another, and then you have the boys who don't seem to care at all. And here's the difference, really, is that people who have empathy negotiate, whereas people without empathy overpower. People with empathy negotiate because what they're looking for is a win-win situation. They want something that's going to make themselves feel good, but at the same time, they want the deal that they're making to make the other person feel good as well. But people without empathy, they don't care. They want themselves to feel good, sure, but they don't care how the other person feels. So a deal that's a win for them and a loss for someone else, so what? And that is the kind of society that a lot of people think that we live in today, where, you know, you basically have some group of people is always screwing over some other group of people, and they don't care how they feel. Whereas in a society with true empathy, then you would have people caring about whether or not everybody is getting their needs. Now, in Molyneux's self-help book, Real-Time Relationships, which I've read, or downloaded and read, the one practical bit of advice, and I say the one practical bit because, good Lord, that book is like, if you're going in there looking for a self-help book, you're going to be a little bit disappointed because it's about 250 pages of philosophizing and then maybe 50 pages, if that, of actual practical help. Like, here's what you can do to help yourself. I don't even know if there's that many pages of it, honestly. But the one practical bit of advice he offers is to speak to others in terms of your feelings, mainly to see whether they care about your feelings at all or have empathy for you. For example, you could talk to somebody and say, "Oh, what you just said now, that really disturbs me. It makes me feel disturbed. I don't know if it's because of what you've said, or if it's just, citing, or it's just dredging up something in me that I feel like I need to talk about." And so you basically are just talking about how you're feeling, as opposed to saying things like, "You did this, you did that, that was wrong, that was right." Or so you're talking about really how things made you feel. When you said that, when you did that, here's how I felt. This can be a useful litmus test to determine whom you should keep in your life, because those who care about you will want to make sure you feel okay. If you tell somebody who genuinely cares about you, when you said that, I felt hurt, then that person, if that person cares about you, is going to want to know, okay, well, what about it that I said, hurt you, or do you think it's what I said that hurt you, or is there something that I said that triggered something else that hurt you? They're going to be concerned for your feelings. But those who don't care about you will be put off by your referencing your feelings. They're the ones who are going to be saying things like, "Well, you need to just get over it." It's like, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but hey, I don't know what to do about that." You know, those people don't actually. Do those people, who speak in those ways, do they actually care about you if they don't care about what you feel? It's hard to say that they do. Now, I can't say there were a whole lot of problems per se with this book, other than the naming thing that I showed before, and maybe a couple of things to do with the earlier chapters. Really, to me, what this book, what these few chapters had, chapters 3 through 7, was a lot of missed opportunity. For example, this was a much better start to the book than we actually got. We had that prologue and we had chapters 1 and 2, but really chapter 3 is where this book should have started. It and its succeeding 4 chapters establish a protagonist and set up the world in which she lives. Then it throws her into an unexpected conflict that we're told will shape the course of her life's journey. Chapter 3 is where the real narrative of this book begins, and this is really where I think the book should have started. The next topic, I seem to have put up a little preliminary, is Ruth. And at the beginning of chapter 3, we're informed that Alice had a sister, Ruth, who died in a freak accident. The book devotes all of 1 paragraph to the family's grieving. Why not use their grieving as a backdrop for exploring this future society that we're so unfamiliar with? We're getting mountains of exposition from the conversations going on in this family, and with this family and other people, and it's all surrounding this family that has already moved on from their most shattering trauma to date. We didn't get to experience any of that. And if we had, maybe we'd care about these characters more, because right now, I'm not really feeling all that connected to these people. I mean, yeah, they went through some trauma up on the mountains, but at the same time, I'm just kind of like, well, glad you made it out okay. Things could have gone a lot worse, but I don't have any connection with these characters at this point. And if we had been introduced to these characters through the lens of their grieving over this lost daughter and getting past that loss, or getting through that loss, then maybe we could have emotionally connected with them sooner. Right now, that just isn't happening. Now, the Cataclysms is a reference to the wars that preceded the creation of this future society. The wars went on for hundreds of years, and one of the things that's irritating is that David and Gretchen, Alice's parents, dance around the subject of the Cataclysms and expressly do not want their daughter to either learn about them through VR experiences, which would be just too direct and too traumatic, and they don't even want her to hang out with kids who make light of the Cataclysms, because there are some kids in our neighborhood who are like inventing these games that they're calling the Cataclysms, and they're reenacting sorts of these terrible wars, which again were responsible for killing off like 95% of the human population. And so the parents don't even want her associating with those kids. Now, I look at this and I think, well, first of all, it's aggravating as hell not to actually hear about what happened during these cataclysms because, I mean, Alice is a kid, but hey, I'm an adult. I can take it. Tell me. Don't give me all this dancing around garbage. But this suppression could have been, and to be fair, may yet be, because I have yet to read the rest of the book, it may turn into a subplot in which Alice goes scavenging for the things that she's not supposed to learn yet. Maybe instead of avoiding these playmates who have knowledge of the cataclysms, she actually pairs up with them, and maybe they go looking for these VR experiences, and maybe she can find herself immersed in those and experience the horror of those. That would be something that would be an interesting subplot. Now, whether or not she's going to go that way, I have no idea. And last but not least, we've got villain quality. And the problem here is that the best villains are those with whom you can at least partly sympathize. But in physically brutalizing the girls, the boys have put themselves beyond that reach. I mean, I just don't care about them anymore. I really don't. To me, it's kind of like if I never heard about the boys again, I'd be like, okay. I mean, and part of this is like the society, of course, is going to go falling all ass over elbows over itself, trying to secure these children's future. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I have a hard time caring. And if the violent aspect of it had not been played up so much, if they had detained the girls, that's a scary enough experience to know that somebody has the power to make you stay where you don't want to be. If they had yelled at the girls, I mean, that'd be something as well. If they had, reacted in anger to hearing about how their life is compared, how the girl's life is compared to how their own life is, and basically trying to either assert their superiority or their dominance or things like that. Those would be all things that I could still wind up having some sympathy for them, thinking, well, they haven't been exposed to this civilized lifestyle. They're living in this survivalist society, and therefore maybe I could have some sort of feeling for them. But the moment they actually laid hands on the girls, the moment they actually punched and slapped them, it's like, I'm done. I'm really done. So I feel like the villain quality went down because the villains are a little too over the top. I mean, whoever it is that's going to come out and represent these kids, because I know a little bit about what happens next. Whoever comes out and represents these kids, it's like, dude, I don't have any regard for you because you're basically saying, oh well, what's a little slap, what's a little punch in the stomach. I mean, it's just kind of one note. It's kind of two-dimensional, and I would really, in a book like this, I really would love to see more three-dimensional characters than what we've gotten in these villains. So that is my review of the 5 chapters, chapters 3 through 7 of The Future, and please do join me next time when I review most likely up through chapter 12, and then we'll be moving into what I believe is phase 2 of the book from there. Thank you for joining me. I'm Mike Partika, and please do subscribe if you get a chance so that you'll be notified when the next in this series comes out, and if any of my other videos come out. And also feel free to link up with me on social media. I'm currently available on gab.com. Go ahead and set yourself up with a free account there, and be prepared to use the block button because it's a rough place. It's the place for people who got kicked off of Twitter. Anyway, thank you for joining, and I will talk to you later.